The fog came in from the Atlantic every morning, thick as erasure. It swallowed the fishing boats whole, turned the cannery into a ghost outline against the gray. Samantha Elizabeth Harrow walked through it daily, her footsteps on wet cobblestone the only sound that confirmed she existed. She was 28 years old. Records indicate she lived at 47 Cedar Lane, a saltbox house with peeling paint and a roof that leaked when the nor'easters hit. Her father, Joseph Harrow, fisherman, chronic alcoholic, had drowned 3 years prior. Some said the sea took him. Others whispered he walked into it deliberately. Her mother, Margaret, bent over a Singer sewing machine 16 hours a day, fingers bleeding into fabric, eyes gone milky from close work under lamplight. Samantha worked as a secretary at Willow Creek Cannery and Processing. The factory records show her hire date, September 1949. 8 years of typing invoices, filing reports, answering phones in a voice that grew quieter each season. She was competent, invisible, the kind of woman men looked through, not at. Until she started noticing patterns. The supervisor, Harold Wickham, age 46, married 3 children, deacon at First Baptist, had a system. Thursday afternoons, when the floor managers attended union negotiations in Portland, he would summon girls from the line. Young ones, immigrant Polish girls who barely spoke English. He called them to his office for performance reviews. They returned with eyes like broken windows. Samantha kept a ledger, not officially. In a small notebook she hid inside a hollowed-out copy of The Ladies' Home Journal. Names, dates. The girls who came back trembling, the ones who stopped showing up entirely. 14 documented incidents between January and March 1957. She showed it to no one. Then came March 15th. The union meeting was held in the basement of St. Michael's Catholic Church, a damp stone room that smelled of mildew and communion wine. 47 workers attended. Samantha sat in the back, hands folded, invisible as always. When the floor opened for grievances, she stood. Her voice didn't shake. That detail appears in 3 witness statements, later discredited. She spoke for 4 minutes. She named Harold Wickham. She cited dates. She described what she had seen. Elena Kowalski crying in the women's lavatory, bruises on her wrists. Maria Santos leaving work early, walking like something inside her had broken. The room went silent. Not the silence of shock, the silence of calculation, of men counting the cost of belief versus the cost of convenience. Harold Wickham was the mayor's brother-in-law. The meeting adjourned without action. Samantha walked home through the fog. The street lamps made halos in the mist. She thought briefly that she had done the right thing. That witness mattered. That speaking truth was a kind of victory, even if nothing changed. She was wrong. They came for her on March 22nd, 1 week later. 2 men in dark suits, a Packard sedan idling at the curb. Her mother answered the door, wiping flour from her hands, confused. "Mrs. Harrow, we're from the State Department of Mental Hygiene." Documents were presented. A petition for involuntary commitment, signed by Dr. Cornelius Webb, a psychiatrist Samantha had never met. The diagnosis: acute hysteria with subversive tendencies and delusional persecution complex. Her mother's signature appeared at the bottom, shaky, coerced. "It's for her own good, ma'am. The state will provide excellent care." Samantha didn't fight. What would have been the point? She packed a single suitcase, 3 dresses, undergarments, a photograph of her father before the bottle took him. She left the notebook hidden. Perhaps she believed she would return for it. The Packard drove for 7 hours, through pine forests, past towns she didn't recognize. The men didn't speak to her. The radio played big band music, cheerful and obscene. They arrived after dark. The Institute Hawthorne for Mental Rehabilitation rose from the hillside like a mausoleum grown malignant. Gothic towers, barred windows, stone walls slick with rain and ivy. A wrought iron gate swung open, silent on oiled hinges. The sedan stopped at the entrance. One of the men opened her door. "Out!" Samantha stepped into the cold. The air smelled of wet stone and something else. Disinfectant, decay, despair compounded over decades. Somewhere inside the building, a woman screamed. The sound cut off abruptly, swallowed by walls too thick to allow escape. The front door was oak, reinforced with iron bands. It opened before they reached it. A matron waited, gray uniform, keys hanging from her belt like instruments of judgment. Admission? Her voice was flat, clerical. Harrow, Samantha Elizabeth. Commitment papers signed and sealed. The matron took Samantha's suitcase without asking, looked her over once, eyes empty of curiosity or compassion. "Follow me." Samantha crossed the threshold. Behind her, the oak door closed. The sound of the bolt sliding home echoed through the entrance hall like a sentence passed, final and immutable. The last sound of the world she had known. No one from Willow Creek ever inquired about her again. The fog, after all, had a way of making things disappear. Institute Hawthorne, Westchester County, New York, March 23, 1957. The admissions room had no windows. That was the first thing Samantha noticed. The second was that no one had told her why. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow pall over institutional green walls. The paint was old, cracked in spiderweb patterns that spread from corners like infection. A metal examination table dominated the center of the room, stirrups angled upward like instruments of prayer or punishment. "Strip." The matron stood beside a steel cart, pen poised over a clipboard. Behind her, a second woman in white, younger, pretty in a severe way, prepared syringes with methodical precision. Everything, undergarments included. Samantha's hands moved slowly. The dress slid from her shoulders. The slip followed. Stockings rolled down legs that hadn't stopped trembling since she crossed the threshold. She stood naked under the fluorescent hum, arms crossed over her breasts, eyes fixed on a water stain on the ceiling that resembled a face screaming. On the table, legs in the stirrups, cold metal against her back. Her feet locked into position, knees forced apart. The indignity was architectural, designed into the furniture itself, calculated to break something inside before the real work began. The examination was thorough, clinical, violating in its dispassion. Gloved hands probed, instruments scraped. The younger nurse took notes. No signs of venereal disease, intact hymen. Physically sound. Any history of epilepsy? Fainting spells? Inappropriate sexual urges? No. Speak only when directly questioned. The matron circled the table like a curator examining a specimen. She lifted Samantha's chin, peered into her eyes, checked her teeth as if assessing livestock. Reflexes normal, pupils responsive, no obvious physical deformities. She made a notation. Mental status, to be determined by Dr. Thorne. The name hung in the air like smoke. They dressed her in institutional gray, a shapeless cotton shift that smelled of bleach and previous occupants. No undergarments, no shoes. Bare feet on cold linoleum, a design choice meant to remind her constantly of her vulnerability. Ward C, 3rd floor, cell 47. The corridor stretched endlessly, lit only by bulbs spaced too far apart, leaving pools of shadow between islands of sickly light. Their footsteps echoed. The matron's hard-soled shoes, Samantha's bare feet whispering against stone. Doors lined both sides, each identical, steel, windowless, numbered in black paint. From behind them came sounds. Weeping, muttering. The rhythmic thud of a head against a wall. No one screamed. Screaming, Samantha would learn, had been trained out of them. They climbed stairs worn concave by decades of shuffling feet. The air grew colder with each flight, damp seeping through the walls like the building itself was sweating. At the 3rd floor landing, a different smell emerged beneath the disinfectant. Urine, unwashed bodies, despair fermented in enclosed spaces. Cell 47 was 6 feet by 8, a cot bolted to the wall, a tin bucket in the corner. No window. A single bulb behind wire mesh controlled from outside. The matron unlocked the door, gestured Samantha inside. Meals at 6, noon, and 6. Lights out at 8. Bathroom privileges twice daily, supervised. No talking after dark, no talking during meals, no talking in the corridors. She paused. No talking unless specifically instructed to speak. The door closed. The lock turned. Samantha sat on the cot. The mattress was thin, stained, covered with a sheet that had been bleached so many times it felt like paper. She pulled her knees to her chest, arms wrapped tight, trying to make herself smaller than the room. Time became unmeasurable. No clock, no window to mark the sun's passage. The bulb above stayed lit, relentless. She counted her breaths, lost count, started again. The door opened without warning. A man stood in the threshold, backlit by corridor light, tall, thin, wearing a white coat so pristine it seemed to glow. He carried a leather folder under one arm, reading glasses perched on a narrow nose. Samantha Elizabeth Harrow. His voice was soft, educated, the kind of voice that narrated documentaries about science and progress. I am Dr. Elias Thorne, superintendent of this facility. I'll be overseeing your treatment. He stepped inside. The matron remained in the doorway, hands folded, face blank. Dr. Thorne sat on the edge of the cot, uninvited, too close. He opened the folder, reviewed pages with theatrical slowness. Acute hysteria, subversive tendencies, delusional persecution complex. He looked up, eyes pale blue and empty of warmth. Quite a collection of afflictions for such a young woman. I'm not sick. They all say that. He smiled. Not unkindly, that was the worst part. The gentleness coating the cruelty. Your employer reports erratic behavior, unfounded accusations against a respected supervisor. Your mother confirms increasing paranoia, insomnia, irrational fixations. That's not, you are here, Miss Harrow, because your mind has betrayed you. The good news is that we have pioneered treatment specifically designed for cases like yours. He closed the folder. The Institute Hawthorne is at the forefront of modern psychiatric medicine. You are fortunate to have been placed in our care. He stood, smoothed his coat, walked to the door, then paused. Treatment begins tomorrow evening. We call it purification therapy, a holistic approach combining physical, psychological, and spiritual elements to realign the disturbed feminine mind. His smile widened fractionally. It can be uncomfortable at first, but discomfort, Miss Harrow, is often the price of redemption. He left. The matron locked the door behind him. Samantha sat in the humming silence, pulse hammering in her throat. The walls seemed closer than before, the ceiling lower, the air thicker. She thought of the notebook hidden in Willow Creek, of Elena Kowalski's bruises, of speaking truth into rooms that preferred lies. Outside in the corridor, a woman began to sob, soft, rhythmic, hopeless. The sound continued for hours, or perhaps minutes. Time had already stopped meaning anything. Somewhere below, in the basement levels Samantha had not yet seen, machinery hummed, pipes clanked. And beneath it all, carried on currents of recycled air, came another sound. Screaming, distant, muffled by stone and steel and institutional denial. But unmistakable. Samantha pressed her hands over her ears, but the sound remained. Not outside anymore. Inside, where all the screams eventually go. Institute Hawthorne, March 25th, 1957, 11:47 p.m. They came for her after the lights went out. Samantha had been lying on the cot, eyes open in the manufactured darkness, listening to the building breathe. The Institute had rhythms. Footsteps on rounds every 2 hours, pipes clanking at irregular intervals, the distant hum of generators in the basement. She had begun to map these sounds, creating a mental architecture of her prison. The key in the lock was not part of the rhythm. 2 orderlies entered without speaking, men in white uniforms, faces blank as plaster masks. They pulled her upright, gripped her arms with practiced efficiency. She tried to ask where they were taking her. One of them placed a finger to his lips. Silence was not a request. It was the first rule of survival. They walked her down the corridor, past cells where women pressed against doors, watching through observation slots with eyes that had already learned not to hope. down the main staircase, past the ground floor, to a door Samantha hadn't seen during admission, steel reinforced, marked only with a number, B7, basement level 7. The orderly in front produced a ring of keys, selected one with a red tag, unlocked 3 separate bolts. The door opened onto descending stairs, concrete and unadorned. The temperature dropped with each step. Moisture beaded on the walls, the smell of earth and limestone and something chemical. Formaldehyde, perhaps, or industrial cleaning agents masking organic decay. At the bottom, a corridor, narrower than above, ceiling lower. Light bulbs enclosed in wire cages every 20 feet, creating pools of shadow between islands of sickly illumination. 5 doors along the left wall, unmarked. The orderlies stopped at the third. Inside, a room 12 feet square, walls lined with soundproofing tiles, the kind used in radio studios. A wooden altar in the center, waist high, polished to a dark gleam by use and oil. Leather restraints at 4 corners. An overhead lamp on a mechanical arm, positioned to illuminate the altar's surface with surgical precision. Dr. Elias Thorne stood beside a steel cart, arranging instruments with the care of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. He wore the same white coat, but had added rubber gloves and a leather apron. Behind him, 3 observers sat in shadows beyond a glass partition, silhouettes in chairs, faces obscured, watching. "Good evening, Miss Harrow." Thorne's voice remained soft, conversational. "Thank you for being prompt." As if she had chosen to be here. "Disrobe and position yourself face down on the altar." Samantha's voice found itself. "I want to speak to someone, a lawyer, my mother, anyone. You signed consent for treatment upon admission. Your mother co-signed. All quite legal, I assure you." He gestured to the altar. "Resistance only prolongs discomfort. We have methods to ensure compliance, but I prefer cooperation." The orderlies moved closer, not threatening, simply present, a reminder that choice was an illusion. She removed the gray shift with shaking hands, stepped forward. The altar's wood was cold against her skin as she lay down, breasts pressed to polished surface, cheek turned sideways. The leather straps closed around her wrists and ankles, not painfully tight, but absolute. She could move her fingers, nothing else. Thorne approached, stood at her head, leaned down so his face filled her vision. "What we do here is not punishment, Samantha. It is correction. The female mind, when afflicted by hysteria, develops pathways of thought that lead to social dysfunction, delusions of persecution, unfounded accusations, rebellion against natural order." He straightened. "Physical purification realigns these pathways. Pain, properly administered, becomes a teacher." He moved out of her line of sight. She heard him select something from the cart, leather creaking. A whistle of air as he tested the weight. 25 treatments, Thorne said almost gently. 1 for each year you've carried this sickness. Tonight is the first. By the 25th, you will have been reborn into clarity." The whip was braided leather, 3 feet long, flexible and precise. Medical records would later describe it as a therapeutic instrument designed for subcutaneous correction without permanent tissue damage. Those records would be classified for 60 years. Thorne positioned himself beside the altar, raised the whip. "This may be difficult to understand now, but in time you will thank me." The first strike landed across her shoulder blades. Pain is a language the body speaks when words fail. This was a sentence, complex, articulate, undeniable. Fire bloomed across skin. Nerves screamed messages to a brain that couldn't process the betrayal. This was a hospital. This was treatment. This was legal. The second strike crossed the first. Samantha bit her lip until blood filled her mouth. She would not scream. Not for them. Not for the silhouettes behind the glass. The third, the fourth, the fifth. Thorne worked with the rhythm of a craftsman, measured pauses between strikes, allowing each welt to rise, each nerve to fully register its complaint before adding another. The whip never broke skin. That would have been excessive. This was medicine, after all. Scientific, progressive. By the 10th strike, Samantha's body had begun shaking uncontrollably. By the 15th, tears streamed sideways across the altar's wood. By the 20th, she had stopped counting. Thorne paused, set down the whip, walked to where her face pressed against varnished wood. "You did well, better than most on their first session." He removed his gloves with a snap of latex. "The body adapts, the mind learns. By the end of our time together, you'll understand that what you perceived as truth was merely illness speaking." He nodded to the orderlies. They unbuckled the restraints. Samantha couldn't stand. Her legs wouldn't support her weight. They dressed her in the gray shift, the fabric scraped across raw flesh like sandpaper, and half-carried her back to cell 47. She lay face down on the cot. The thin mattress felt like crushed glass against her back. Every breath moved skin that no longer wanted to move. Sleep came eventually. Not rest, just a kind of shutting down. The body's emergency protocol when consciousness becomes unbearable. She woke to pale light seeping under the door. Morning, first day after. In the corridor, a cart rattled past. Breakfast service. Samantha turned her head toward the sound and saw, scratched into the wall beside her cot, barely visible, "You are not the first." MS? Someone had been here before her. Someone had survived to leave a message. Samantha closed her eyes. 24 treatments remained, but now she knew she was not alone in this particular darkness. The question was, had MS survived all 25? Or had she, like so many others, simply stopped being a name and become a number in a filing cabinet marked "Discharged, Deceased, Do Not Investigate"? Institute Hawthorne, March 28, 1957. Recovery was not permitted. 3 days after the first treatment, Samantha was assigned to the laundry detail. The matron appeared at her cell at 6 a.m., unlocked the door, handed her a bundle of clothes that approximated a uniform. Gray dress, white apron, canvas shoes 2 sizes too large. Report to Sublevel 2. East Corridor, follow the steam. The laundry occupied a vast basement room with vaulted ceilings blackened by decades of moisture and heat. Industrial washers lined one wall, their drums large enough to hold a human body. Drying racks stretched the length of the room, sheets hanging like shrouds in the humid air. The temperature hovered near 90 degrees. Condensation dripped from pipes overhead, creating puddles on the concrete floor. 17 women worked there, silent, methodical, moving between stations with the choreography of people who had learned that efficiency was survival. Samantha was assigned to folding, a long metal table near the back, away from the worst of the heat. An older woman, gray hair pinned severely, hands gnarled by arthritis, worked beside her. For 2 hours, they folded sheets in silence. Then the woman spoke, voice barely above a whisper, lips barely moving. "Don't react, keep folding, eyes on your work." Samantha's hands continued their mechanical rhythm. Fold, smooth, stack. "My name is Ruth Caldwell." A pause. Another sheet folded. "I was a journalist, Boston Herald. I wrote about municipal corruption. Wrong people got angry." Her hands moved steadily. That was 1954, 3 years ago. Samantha kept her eyes down. "Samantha Harrow, cannery secretary. I reported harassment." "They don't like reporters. Of any kind." Ruth reached for another sheet. "The woman who worked this table before you, Miriam Santos. Union organizer. Garment workers. She lasted 16 months. Where is she now?" Ruth's hands paused for half a second. "Graduated." The word hung in the steaming air like a curse. What does that mean? It means she's not here anymore. It means her file says released rehabilitated. It means no one from her family ever came looking. Ruth's voice dropped further. It means she's in the garden. The garden? Behind the West Wing, where they bury the ones who don't make it through treatment. No markers, no names, just numbers and lime. Samantha's hands faltered. A sheet slipped from the table. She caught it, refolded it, forced her breathing steady. "How many? Treatments or graves?" "Both." Ruth considered this. "Treatments vary. Thorne decides based on diagnosis. 15 to 35 sessions. The graves. She shook her head slightly. I stopped counting at 40. A matron walked past, keys jangling. Both women fell silent, hands moving in practiced rhythm. The matron paused, watched them for 15 seconds, then continued on. Ruth waited a full minute before speaking again. You've had your first session. It wasn't a question. Yes. How many did he tell you? 25. You're lucky. I had 30. Miriam had 35. Ruth folded another sheet with meticulous care. The higher the number, the more dangerous Thorne considers you. 35 means he's not sure you'll survive. 25 means he thinks you can be broken properly. I don't feel lucky. You will, after you meet the ones who got 40. Across the room, a woman screamed, not loudly. A truncated sound, bitten off before it fully formed. 2 orderlies appeared from nowhere, lifted her by the arms, carried her toward a door marked discipline. She didn't struggle. That was somehow worse than resistance would have been. That's Helen, Ruth said. She tried to escape 6 months ago, got as far as the main gate before the dogs caught her. Thorne added 10 sessions to her treatment. She's on 38 now. Will she survive? Ruth didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice carried the weight of witnessed truth. Helen died 3 weeks ago. Officially, she's still here. They're keeping her body in cold storage until her final scheduled session date passes. Then they'll process the paperwork. Makes the numbers work better. Samantha's hand stopped moving entirely. That's insane. Welcome to the asylum. Ruth's laugh was dust dry. The irony would be funny if we weren't living it. The lunch bell rang, a harsh electric buzz that echoed through the basement. The women formed a line, silent, automatic. Samantha followed Ruth to a dining hall with long metal tables and benches bolted to the floor. The meal was gray. Gray porridge, gray bread, gray water in metal cups. They ate without speaking. Matrons walked the aisles, watching for infractions. On the way back to the laundry, Ruth leaned close. There's someone you need to meet. Tonight, if you're allowed bathroom privileges, 3rd stall from the left, she'll find you. Who? Her name is Abigail. She's a nurse. Ruth paused, choosing words carefully. She still has a conscience. Rare thing in this place. That night at 8:15 p.m., Samantha's cell door opened. A different matron, younger with kind eyes that seemed out of place in the uniform, stood in the corridor. Bathroom. Samantha followed her to a tiled room with 10 stalls and a row of sinks. The matron positioned herself by the door, back turned, granting a moment of privacy. Samantha entered the 3rd stall from the left, carved into the metal divider, barely visible in the dim light. Look up. She did. Taped to the underside of the toilet tank, a small bundle wrapped in wax paper. Inside, a stub of pencil and 3 sheets of paper folded tight. And a note in careful handwriting. Write everything, names, dates, what they do in the basement. What Thorne says, everything. Hide these pages in the seam of your mattress. I'll collect them weekly. This is not treatment, this is torture. Someone outside needs to know, someone will believe us. We just have to survive long enough to tell them. Abigail. Samantha held the paper in shaking hands. Evidence, witness. Hope disguised as contraband. She tucked the bundle into the waistband of her institutional dress, returned to the main room, washed her hands with deliberate slowness. The kind-eyed matron led her back to cell 47. Sleep well, the woman said, and there was something in her voice. A crack in the institutional mask, a flicker of human recognition. The door locked. Samantha sat on the cot, back pressed to the wall, feeling the contraband pencil against her skin like a weapon or a prayer. 24 treatments remained. But now she had something Thorne hadn't anticipated. A purpose beyond survival. A record that would outlive her silence. Institute Hawthorne, April 1957. Dr. Thorne believed in cycles. Samantha learned this during the 2nd treatment, administered on the night of April 8th, exactly 14 days after the first. He explained it while preparing his instruments, voice measured and pedagogical. as if lecturing medical students rather than addressing a woman strapped to an altar. "The feminine mind operates according to lunar rhythms," he said, selecting a whip from his collection. This one slightly thicker, the braiding tighter. 28 days mirroring the celestial cycle. Your affliction reached its peak over 25 years. Therefore, 25 corrective sessions, administered at intervals aligned with the moon's phases. He consulted a chart mounted on the wall, a calendar marked with astronomical notations. New moon, waxing crescent, first quarter, each phase annotated with treatment protocols. Tonight is the waxing gibbous, ideal for addressing delusional persistence, he positioned himself. The body remembers celestial truth even when the mind rebels against it. The second treatment lasted longer than the first. 30 strikes instead of 20. Thorne worked with the precision of a cartographer, mapping welts across her back in deliberate patterns. He avoided striking the same area twice in succession, allowing each impact to blossom fully before adding the next. Medical justification, he explained, prevented scar tissue formation that might reduce therapeutic efficacy. Samantha bit through her lip. Blood pooled on the altar beneath her face. She did not scream. By the third treatment, April 22nd, under the waning crescent, Thorne had refined his methodology. He introduced variations, lighter strikes in rapid succession, creating cumulative pain without visible marking. Heavier blows spaced apart, allowing anticipation to compound suffering. Psychology and physiology, he lectured during pauses, are inseparable in effective treatment. The observers behind the glass took notes. Samantha began her documentation that night. Hidden in her cell, pencil stub gripped in shaking fingers, she wrote on the smuggled paper, Treatment 3, April 22nd, waning crescent, 45 strikes, variable intensity. Thorne referenced Phase 3 protocols. Observers present, counted 4 silhouettes. 1 took photographs, flash visible through glass. She hid the paper in the mattress seam Ruth had shown her. A tear in the ticking, barely visible, perfect for concealment. By the 4th treatment, May 6th new moon, patterns emerged. Thorne scheduled sessions during specific lunar phases. He consulted historical texts, leather-bound volumes stacked on a lectern beside the altar, medieval treatises on female hysteria, Victorian medical journals, pseudo-scientific manuscripts blending astronomy and gynecology into a doctrine of correction. The ancients understood what modern medicine forgot, he said, almost reverently. Woman is governed by cycles. To cure her, we must work with these rhythms, not against them. The 4th session introduced tools beyond the whip, a leather strap, wide and flat, designed to distribute impact across larger surface area. A cane, thin and flexible, creating linear welts that rose like brands. 45 minutes of methodical application. Samantha's consciousness fragmented. Pain became a separate entity, something happening to a body she no longer fully inhabited. She observed from a distance, clinical and detached, counting strikes to maintain sanity. 53, 54, 55. Afterward, back in cell 47, she wrote with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Treatment 4, May 6th, new moon. 55 strikes, new instruments introduced. Thorne reading from book, title visible. De Morbis Mulierum, on women's diseases, author unknown, appeared very old. He mentioned purification intensification for upcoming treatments. The 5th treatment fell on May 20th, waxing gibbous again. Thorne seemed pleased with her progress. Your resistance is diminishing appropriately. The body submits before the mind, but the mind follows, always. 62 strikes that night. She lost count after 40, drifting into a state that wasn't quite unconsciousness but wasn't fully present either. A gray space where pain existed but couldn't quite reach her. She woke in her cell with no memory of the return journey. Her documentation grew more detailed. Treatment 5, May 20th, 62 strikes, estimated, lost count. Blacked out near end, woke in cell at unknown hour. Back feels like broken glass embedded in flesh, welts overlapping previous ones. Thorne mentioned approaching critical threshold, unsure what this means. By the 6th treatment, June 3rd, Samantha had survived a full lunar cycle. Thorne celebrated this milestone by introducing a new element: ice water applications between strikes. The shock of cold on inflamed tissue created a different quality of pain: sharp, electric, somehow more cruel than the whip itself. Contrast therapy, he explained. Heat from trauma, cold for neurological reset. The body learns through extremes. 70 strikes that session, ice applications after every 10th. Samantha screamed once, a sound torn from her throat despite every intention otherwise. Thorne paused, smiled slightly, noted it on his clipboard. Progress, he said. The 7th treatment, June 17th under the full moon, broke something fundamental. Not her body. That had learned to endure. But something deeper. A sense of continuity between past and present, between the woman who entered this room and the organism that left it. 83 strikes, 3 different implements. Ice, then heat, hot compresses applied to welts, reactivating pain that had begun to numb. She wrote that night in handwriting barely legible. Treatment. 7. June 17th, full moon. Lost count after 80. Thorne using heat now. Says we're past halfway to breakthrough. My name feels foreign. Sometimes forget it for hours. Ruth says this is normal. Is anything normal here? The 8th treatment arrived on July 1st. Samantha entered the basement chamber with the mechanical obedience of someone whose will had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt around a single imperative: survive long enough to document. Thorne prepared his instruments with familiar efficiency. Behind the glass, the observers assembled. 4 silhouettes as always. But tonight, in the front row, a 5th figure. The overhead light shifted during preparation, throwing the glass partition into brief transparency. Samantha saw the 5th observer's face clearly for 3 seconds before shadow reclaimed it. Harold Wickham, the supervisor from Willow Creek Cannery, the man she had denounced, sitting comfortably in a leather chair, holding a cocktail glass, watching her naked and restrained on an altar in a psychiatric institution basement. He raised his glass slightly. A toast. A victory celebration. Thorne began the 8th treatment. Samantha's scream that night wasn't pain. It was recognition. The truth she'd been circling since admission crystallized with perfect, terrible clarity. This wasn't treatment. This was punishment. This was what happened to women who spoke. And the men she'd threatened, they didn't just want her silenced, they wanted to watch. Institute Hawthorne, July 1957. The laundry detail granted access to restricted areas, not intentionally, but institutional efficiency required clean linens throughout the facility, including sections where patients never went. Ruth understood this. She'd spent 3 years mapping the Institute's geography through laundry routes, building a mental blueprint of corridors most inmates never saw. Pavilion C, she whispered during folding shift, 3 days after Samantha's 8th treatment. East Wing, isolated section. They take linens there twice weekly, Thursdays and Sundays. Samantha's hands moved mechanically, folding sheets still warm from the dryer. What's in Pavilion C? That's what we need to find out. Ruth glanced toward the matrons. Miriam went there once on laundry detail, came back different. Wouldn't talk about what she saw. 2 weeks later, she was dead. How do we get assigned? We don't. We volunteer. Ruth's mouth twisted bitterly. Show enthusiasm for work, model behavior. They reward compliance with additional responsibilities. It took Samantha 11 days to earn the privilege. She scrubbed floors without complaint, folded linens with meticulous precision, kept her eyes down, spoke only when addressed, became invisible through perfect obedience. On July 18th, Matron Prescott approached her during morning detail. You're reassigned to Pavilion C laundry service, Thursdays and Sundays. Report to loading dock at Ora 600 hours. The loading dock connected the main building to outlying structures via underground tunnels. Samantha and 2 other women, neither of whom she recognized, loaded canvas carts with fresh linens and followed an orderly through passages lined with exposed pipes, and electrical conduits. The tunnel to Pavilion C descended slightly. Temperature dropped. Moisture beaded on concrete walls. After 200 yards, they reached a checkpoint. Steel door, armed guard, clipboard verification. The guard examined their work assignments, checked their faces against photographs, unlocked the door. Beyond, a corridor cleaner than anywhere else in the Institute. White tiles, bright fluorescent lighting. The smell of antiseptic so strong it burned the sinuses. Medical equipment lined the walls. Oxygen tanks, IV stands, wheeled gurneys, but no patients visible. Just closed doors numbered sequentially C1 through C17. The orderly stopped at a supply closet, began unloading fresh linens. Sort these by size. Stack them here. Don't speak, don't wander, don't look into the rooms. He left them there. Samantha worked slowly, deliberately, ears straining for any sound beyond the rustle of fabric. The other two women kept their heads down, moving with the hunched posture of people who had learned not to be curious. From behind door C7, a voice. Female, slurred and distant as if speaking through layers of cotton. Can't feel my hands. When does it stop? Please. Samantha's hands froze. One of the other women grabbed her wrist, squeezed hard. Warning, don't react. Footsteps approached from the far end of the corridor. A doctor emerged. Not Thorne, someone younger, wearing surgical scrubs. He carried a metal tray covered with a cloth. Entered room C11 without knocking. Through the briefly open door, Samantha glimpsed a hospital bed, leather restraints, IV stands, and a woman, young, maybe 20, strapped down, head shaved, electrodes attached to her skull. The door closed. 30 seconds later, a sound. Not a scream. Worse than a scream. A gurgling, choking gasp, wet and desperate and utterly inhuman. Then silence. The orderly returned. Finished? They nodded mutely. Good? Back to main building. Next delivery Sunday. That night, Samantha wrote in cramped handwriting on her hidden papers. Pavilion C, medical wing, restricted access. Observed 17 rooms, all closed. Patient heard in C7, heavily sedated. Glimpsed patient in C11, restrained, electrodes on head, appeared unconscious. Heard sounds suggesting electroshock therapy. No patient names visible. All doors numbered only. Sunday's delivery confirmed her suspicions. Different orderly, same protocol. But this time, while sorting linens, a door opened unexpectedly. Room C4. A nurse emerged carrying a tray of used syringes. Behind her, visible for 3 seconds, a woman sitting upright in bed staring at nothing, drool running down her chin. Her hospital gown bore a stenciled number. 4472. No name, just a number. The nurse kicked the door closed. Samantha returned to folding, mind racing. She waited until the orderly stepped away, then whispered to the woman beside her. What happens here? The woman's eyes went wide with terror. She shook her head frantically, mouthed a single word. Don't. But Ruth, back in the laundry that afternoon, was less frightened. Pavilion C is where they conduct experiments, she said, voice barely audible over the washing machines. Funded by outside agencies, government contracts. Thorne mentioned it once, thought I was too sedated to remember. What kind of experiments? Electroshock. Sensory deprivation. Chemical agents. Ruth's hands shook slightly. Miriam found documents, hidden in a supply closet. Research protocols for something called Project Bluebird, later renamed MKUltra. The name meant nothing to Samantha. What is that? Mind control research. Breaking down personality. Testing interrogation techniques. Using psychiatric patients as subjects because no one questions what happens to crazy people. Ruth's voice went flat. Miriam tried to smuggle the documents out. They caught her. 3 days later, she was transferred to Pavilion C. I saw her once after that, during laundry detail. She didn't recognize me, didn't recognize her own name. Where is she now? The Garden officially died of heart failure at age 32. No autopsy, no investigation. Buried in an unmarked plot. Ruth paused. Her real crime wasn't finding the documents. It was believing anyone would care. That night, Samantha added to her hidden record: Pavilion C houses experimental subjects, electroshock, chemical treatments, possibly LSD or similar agents, government-funded research, Project Bluebird MK mentioned by Ruth, patients identified by number only. Miriam Santos was transferred here after discovering evidence. She died shortly after. This is not a hospital. This is a laboratory. 3 days later, during Thursday's delivery, Samantha found something. While the orderly dealt with a supply discrepancy, she slipped into a staff bathroom. Inside a trash bin, torn papers, hastily discarded. She retrieved 3 fragments, stuffed them in her undergarments. Back in cell 47, she pieced them together under the dim bulb. Fragment 1. Subject 4471 responded poorly to 450 application. Recommend increasing sedation before next. Fragment 2. CIA funding approved for Phase 3. Dr. Thorne authorized to proceed with female subjects aged 1845. Diagnosis irrelevant. Priority test breaking points. Fragment 3. Disposal protocols remain unchanged. Contact municipal crematorium for... The third fragment ended mid-sentence. Samantha stared at the papers until her eyes burned. Disposal protocols. They weren't just experimenting on patients. They were planning for failures, for deaths, for making bodies disappear. She added the fragments to her growing archive, hidden in the mattress seam where Abigail collected them weekly. Somewhere in the building, a woman screamed. Brief, cut off abruptly by sedation or force or the simple exhaustion of hope. Samantha lay on her cot, back still raw from the 8th treatment, knowing the 9th would come in 12 days. Knowing that each session brought her closer to the threshold where patients stopped being experimental subjects and became disposal problems. Knowing that the only thing keeping her alive was her documentation. The record that someone, someday, might actually read, if she survived long enough to get it outside these walls. Institute Hawthorne, September 9th, 1957. The 15th treatment fell on a Monday night, under a harvest moon so large it seemed to press against the barred windows like a watchful eye. Samantha had survived 4 months, 137 days since admission, 63 days since discovering Harold Wickham among the observers, 42 days since first accessing Pavilion C. Her body had become a map of accumulated trauma, welts layered upon welts, scar tissue forming patterns that Thorne photographed with clinical fascination. Her documentation had grown to 17 pages, each one smuggled to Abigail during bathroom privileges, each one a small act of defiance against institutional erasure. She believed she understood the rhythm of survival. She was wrong. The orderlies came for her at 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes later than usual. She noticed immediately. Schedules were sacred in the Institute. Deviations meant something had changed. They led her down the familiar route. Basement level 7, the soundproofed chamber. But tonight, additional chairs had been arranged behind the observation glass. Not 4 silhouettes, 8. Thorne stood beside the altar, but he wasn't alone. Dr. Cornelius Webb, the psychiatrist who had signed Samantha's original commitment papers without ever meeting her, stood consulting a leather notebook. Beside him, 2 men in suits that were too expensive for state employees. Federal agents, perhaps, or corporate observers from pharmaceutical companies funding the research. And in the back row, Harold Wickham. Always Harold Wickham. Miss Harrow. Thorne's voice carried a note of satisfaction. Tonight marks a significant milestone. The midpoint of your treatment. 15 sessions completed, 10 remaining. Your progress has been instructive. He gestured to the altar. Samantha removed her institutional dress with mechanical obedience. The exposure no longer humiliated her. Shame required a sense of self-worth protecting, and that had been systematically dismantled. She positioned herself face down. The leather restraints closed around her wrists and ankles. Thorne selected his instrument, the braided whip he reserved for standard protocols. He tested its weight, the leather cutting air with a familiar whistle. But before beginning, he addressed the observers. Gentlemen, What you'll witness tonight demonstrates the efficacy of sustained behavioral correction. Subject 4489. He gestured toward Samantha, reducing her to a number. Presented with acute hysteria and subversive tendencies. Paranoid delusions regarding workplace harassment. Unfounded accusations against a respected community member. Harold Wickham shifted in his chair. Samantha couldn't see his face, but she imagined his smile. Through consistent application of purification therapy, we've observed marked reduction in delusional expression. The subject no longer insists upon false narratives. She accepts her diagnosis. She cooperates with treatment. This represents successful realignment of disturbed cognitive pathways. One of the suited men raised a hand. And the physical effects? Long-term damage? Minimal? Superficial tissue trauma that heals between sessions. We've refined the technique to maximize psychological impact while preserving experimental viability. Thorne paused. Should the subject require transfer to Pavilion C for Phase 3 trials, she remains physically suitable. Samantha's breath caught. Pavilion C, Phase 3. They were planning to escalate. The whip fell before she could process the implications. This session was different. Thorne worked faster, harder, abandoning the measured rhythm of previous treatments. The strikes came in rapid succession, 5, 6, 7 without pause. Pain compounded. Each impact landing before the previous one had fully registered. 93 strikes in 40 minutes. Samantha's consciousness began fragmenting around strike 60. The gray space opened beneath her, the dissociative state where pain existed but couldn't quite reach her core. She floated there, observing from a distance as her body convulsed against restraints. Somewhere beyond the ringing in her ears, Thorne lectured. Demonstrates remarkable resilience. Candidates for extended protocols. Preliminary approval for chemical augmentation. At strike 78, Samantha screamed. Not deliberately. The sound tore from her throat like something being born against her will. Raw, animal, defeated. Thorne paused. Progress, he said, exactly as he had months ago. The observers took notes. The session ended at 12:47 a.m. The orderlies released her restraints, but Samantha couldn't move. Her legs had stopped responding to nerve signals. They dressed her in the gray shift. The fabric adhered to broken skin, creating new pain as it absorbed blood and serum. They carried her back to cell 47. She lay face down on the cot, shaking uncontrollably. Hours passed. The trembling wouldn't stop. Near dawn, her cell door opened. Abigail slipped inside, carrying a small medical kit hidden beneath her apron. She closed the door quietly, moved to the cot, knelt beside Samantha. "Don't speak," Abigail whispered. "I don't have much time." She lifted Samantha's shift carefully, exposing the devastation across her back. Abigail's breath hitched, an involuntary sound of horror barely suppressed. "Jesus Christ," she breathed. She worked quickly, cleaning wounds with alcohol that burned like redemption, applying salve that smelled of camphor and mercy. Her hands were gentle, the first gentle touch Samantha had experienced in 4 months. "I have something," Abigail whispered while bandaging the worst areas. "Something that will change everything." From her pocket, she produced a small camera, a Kodak Brownie, compact and forbidden. "I've been photographing you, after each session, the progression of damage." Her voice shook. "I have 14 photographs. Tonight makes 15. Your back tells a story that words can't capture." Samantha turned her head slightly. "Why?" "Because someone needs to see this. Someone outside needs proof that can't be denied or explained away." Abigail positioned the camera, adjusted the angle. "The photographs go to my brother. He's a journalist in Philadelphia. He has contacts. People who might actually listen." Flash powder ignited. The sudden light was blinding. "One more," Abigail said. "Different angle." Another flash. "These will take time to develop. I have to use the hospital darkroom after hours, process them in secret." She packed the camera away. "But once they're ready, once they're safely delivered, we'll have evidence that even Thorne can't suppress." "What if you're caught?" Abigail's smile was sad. Then I end up in a cell like yours. Or worse. She stood, gathering her supplies. But some things are worth the risk. What they're doing here, to you, to all of you, it has to stop. She moved toward the door, paused. Samantha, the documents you've been writing, the ones I've been collecting. She looked back. I've been sending them out too, one page at a time, hidden in letters to my brother. He's building a file. Testimony, evidence, dates, names, everything. Hope, dangerous, forbidden hope, flickered in Samantha's chest. How long until? I don't know. Months, maybe. These things take time. Building a case, finding journalists willing to publish, convincing authorities to investigate. Abigail's hand rested on the door handle. But it's happening. Slowly. Quietly. The truth is getting out. She slipped into the corridor, locked the door behind her. Samantha lay in the darkness, back blazing with fresh pain, but mind suddenly, impossibly clear. 15 treatments survived, 10 remaining, and somewhere beyond these walls evidence was accumulating. Photographs developing, documents being assembled, a case being built against men who believed themselves untouchable. She just had to survive long enough to see it matter. 10 more sessions, 70 more days approximately if Thorne maintained the lunar schedule. Samantha closed her eyes and began counting. One breath at a time. Institute Hawthorne, October-November 1957. The camera became an act of resistance. Abigail worked in shadows, in stolen minutes, in the gaps between institutional routine where surveillance grew thin. The hospital darkroom, officially reserved for X-ray processing, sat in a basement corridor rarely patrolled after 10 p.m. She had acquired a key through methods she refused to specify. The less you know, she told Samantha, the safer you are if they question you. The 16th treatment occurred on September 23rd. 97 strikes, chemical agents introduced, a topical application that magnified nerve sensitivity, transforming each subsequent blow into exquisite agony. Thorne explained it was derived from capsaicin, used in experimental pain research. Samantha survived by counting ceiling tiles. There were 43. That night, Abigail photographed the results. 2 exposures, one wide shot showing the full landscape of damage, one close-up capturing individual welts in brutal detail. The film is expensive, Abigail whispered while changing Samantha's bandages. I can only afford to shoot after every other session now. But that's enough. The progression will still be visible. The 17th treatment, October 7th, under a waning moon, pushed Samantha past a threshold she hadn't known existed. 104 strikes. 3 different implements. Thorne working with the enthusiasm of a scientist approaching a breakthrough. We're entering the final third, he announced to the observers. This is where true transformation occurs, where the subject's resistance collapses entirely, and reconstruction can begin. Samantha didn't remember the return to her cell. Consciousness became optional somewhere around strike 80. She woke to Abigail's gentle hands cleaning wounds that had begun weeping clear fluid. I need you to stay still, Abigail said. This one is important. The camera flash illuminated cell walls like lightning in a stone tomb. Beautiful, Abigail breathed, not in admiration, but in horror. In the worst possible way. No one can look at this and claim it's medical treatment. She showed Samantha the developed photographs from the 16th session, contraband smuggled in beneath her uniform. Samantha stared at her own back rendered in black and white. The image was clinical, devastating. Welts overlapped in patterns that resembled topographical maps, valleys and ridges of damaged tissue, dark bruising spreading like continents across pale skin. My God, Samantha whispered. Exactly. Abigail tucked the photographs away. My brother has 6 images now. He's shown them to contacts at the Philadelphia Inquirer. They're interested, but they need more. More proof. More documentation. They need to be certain this isn't staged, isn't fabricated. How could anyone think? You'd be surprised what people can convince themselves to disbelieve when powerful men are implicated. Abigail's voice carried bitter experience. "We need photographs from at least 20 sessions. We need your written testimony. We need evidence of Pavilion C. We need everything to be irrefutable." The 18th treatment, October 21st, introduced a new horror. Ice baths immediately following the whipping. Samantha's body, already traumatized, subjected to near-freezing water for 15 minutes. The shock sent her into convulsions. Thorne observed with professional interest, timing the seizures with a stopwatch. Thermal stress combined with physical trauma produces fascinating neurological responses, he dictated to his assistant. "Recommend continued exploration in Phase 4 protocols." Abigail photographed the aftermath. Samantha's lips blue, skin mottled, eyes vacant with shock. "This one goes in the file immediately," Abigail said while warming Samantha's hands between her own. "This crosses into torture territory. Undeniable." The 19th treatment, November 4th, was witnessed by 12 observers. The chamber had been upgraded. Better lighting for photography. Additional seating. A presentation lectern where Thorne could explain techniques to visiting doctors and federal officials. Samantha had become a teaching specimen. 112 strikes, administered while Thorne lectured about behavioral extinction through systematic desensitization. The observers applauded when he finished. Harold Wickham led the ovation. That night, Abigail photographed Samantha's back with grim determination, but she also took a risk. She positioned her camera to capture the reflection in a metal tray, showing not just the damage, but the institutional setting. The cell number visible on the door, the hospital issue cot. The evidence that this was happening in a state facility, not some dark basement unknown to authorities. "Context matters," Abigail explained. "We need to show where this is happening, who's responsible." The 20th treatment, November 18th, broke something in Samantha that hadn't yet shattered. Not her body, not her mind. Her faith that surviving mattered. 119 strikes. Thorne working with theatrical flourish, performing for an audience of 16 observers who had paid significant fees to witness advanced psychiatric techniques. Samantha heard them discussing her during pauses. Remarkable resilience. How much more can she endure? Is the subject available for post-treatment interviews? She wasn't a person anymore. She was a case study, a demonstration model. Afterward, in her cell, Abigail found her unresponsive. "Samantha, look at me." Eyes open but empty. "Samantha, I need you to hear this." Nothing. Abigail gripped her shoulders. "The photographs are working. My brother has shown them to the Philadelphia Inquirer, the New York Times, and a congressional aide. They're building a case. They're talking about Senate hearings. They're using words like human rights violations and systematic abuse." Samantha blinked slowly. 5 more treatments. That's all. 5 more. And we'll have enough documentation to bring down Thorne, Wickham, everyone involved. Abigail's voice cracked. "But I need you to survive 5 more sessions. Can you do that?" Silence. Then barely audible. "Yes." Abigail photographed the 20th treatment's aftermath. 3 exposures this time, full back, close-up of the worst welts, and a profile shot showing Samantha's face. Eyes closed, tear tracks visible even in harsh flashlight. "This one is perfect," Abigail whispered. "This shows everything." She developed the prints that night, working in the darkroom until 3 a.m. The images emerged from chemical baths like truth rising from deliberate obscurity. 20 photographs now. Documentation spanning 5 months. Visual proof of systematic torture disguised as medical treatment. Abigail sealed them in an envelope, addressed to her brother in Philadelphia. Added a note. 20 sessions documented. A subject deteriorating but conscious. 5 more treatments scheduled, ending approximately late December. Recommend immediate action. Delay risks subject's death and loss of primary witness. Additional evidence available. Written testimony, 17 pages. Recovered institutional documents. Potential testimony from other survivors. Urgency cannot be overstated. A.M. She mailed it the next morning from a post office 3 miles from the Institute during her day off. The envelope traveled south through postal routes, carrying images that would eventually topple empires built on silence. But that would take time, and Samantha had 5 more sessions to survive. 5 more descents into the basement chamber. 5 more encounters with men who believed pain was pedagogy and torture was treatment. 5 more opportunities to die before the truth could matter. In cell 47, Samantha lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling. 43 tiles. She'd counted them so many times they'd become a meditation, a mantra. 43 tiles between her and oblivion. 5 more treatments between her and freedom, or death. At this point, she wasn't sure which one she wanted more. Institute Hawthorne, December 16, 1957. The final treatment was scheduled for the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, when darkness held dominion over light. Thorne believed in symbolism. He had explained this during the 21st session, while administering 126 strikes with methodical precision. Rebirth requires complete darkness first, he had said. The death of the old self, the emergence of the corrected one. Samantha had survived treatments 21 through 24 in a state of dissociative automation. Her body attended the sessions, her consciousness observed from increasing distance. She counted strikes, ceiling tiles, seconds between impacts. Mathematics became a lifeline when identity dissolved. Treatment 21, November 30th, 126 strikes. Chemical burns introduced. A caustic solution applied to welts, creating deeper tissue damage without breaking skin. Treatment 22, December 2nd, 131 strikes. Sensory deprivation afterward, locked in a lightless cell for 18 hours. No sound except her own breathing. Treatment 23, December 9th, 137 strikes. Thorne's hands trembling with excitement as he approached what he called the transformation threshold. Treatment 24, December 13th, 142 strikes. Abigail photographed the aftermath with tears streaming down her face. "One more," she whispered. "Just one more, and we have everything we need." Now, December 16th, the 25th ritual. The solstice was still 5 days away, but Thorne had moved the schedule forward. "Special circumstances," he explained to his assistant. "Distinguished visitors arriving specifically for the culminating session. We accommodate their calendars." Samantha was escorted to the basement chamber at 10 p.m., earlier than usual. The change in routine felt ominous. The chamber had been transformed. 25 chairs arranged in a semicircle behind the observation glass. All occupied. Samantha recognized some faces now: hospital administrators, pharmaceutical executives, military officers in civilian clothes. Harold Wickham sat front row center, holding a champagne flute. This wasn't a treatment. It was a celebration. Thorne stood beside the altar wearing formal attire beneath his white coat, a concession to the occasion's ceremonial nature. He addressed the audience like a conductor before a symphony. "Gentlemen, what you witnessed tonight represents the culmination of 6 months of intensive behavioral correction. Subject 4489 entered this facility as a dangerous hysteric, delusional, subversive, resistant to social order. Through systematic application of purification therapy, we have reconstructed her cognitive architecture entirely." Applause rippled through the observation room. "Tonight's final session will demonstrate the complete erasure of maladaptive patterns and the subject's full acceptance of corrective authority. This represents not merely treatment, but transformation. Proof that even the most resistant feminine mind can be realigned through proper methodology." He gestured toward Samantha. "Please assume position." She moved mechanically, removed the gray shift, positioned herself on the altar. The leather restraints closed with familiar finality. Thorne selected his instrument, not the standard whip, but something new. A cat o' nine tails, each strand tipped with small metal beads. Ceremonial. Devastating. "This final purification will be comprehensive," Thorne announced. 150 applications representing the totality of correction achieved. 150, more than any previous session, designed to break whatever fragments of self remained intact. The first strike landed like judgment. Pain exploded across nerve pathways that had been sensitized by months of accumulated trauma. The metal beads caught skin, creating puncture wounds that previous sessions had avoided. Samantha's vision went white. Strike 2, strike 3, strike 4. Her body convulsed against restraints. No dissociation available now. The pain was too immediate, too overwhelming to escape. Strike 15, 20, 30. Blood appeared. Real blood, not just serum weeping from damaged tissue. The beads had broken through scar tissue to raw flesh beneath. Thorne paused, consulted his notes, adjusted his technique. "Fascinating," he murmured. "The subject's pain threshold has paradoxically decreased despite conditioning. Previous sessions created neural sensitivity rather than adaptation." He resumed, faster now. Strike 40, 50, 60. Samantha screamed, not the controlled scream of earlier sessions, but something primal and unfiltered. The sound filled the chamber, bounced off soundproofed walls, absorbed into tile and stone. The observers leaned forward. Strike 70, 80, 90. Consciousness began fragmenting. Not dissociation, actual fragmentation. Samantha felt pieces of herself detaching, floating away like debris after an explosion. Her name felt foreign, her memories uncertain. The woman who had worked at a cannery, who had spoken at a union meeting, who had believed truth mattered. That person became abstract, theoretical. Strike 100, 110, 120. Thorne worked with increasing fervor. His breathing had changed, excitement barely controlled. This was his masterwork. His proof of methodology's triumph over resistance. Strike 130, 140. Samantha's screaming stopped. Not because the pain lessened, but because her body had exhausted its capacity for response. Vocal cords damaged, breath shallow and ragged, vision tunneling toward darkness. She thought, "This is how I die." Then she thought, "Good." Then she stopped thinking entirely. Strike 145. Through the haze of approaching unconsciousness, Samantha heard voices beyond the glass. Is she still conscious? Questionable. Vital signs? Pulse elevated but stable. Respiration compromised but adequate. Continue to completion. We paid for the full demonstration. Strike 148. Samantha's last coherent thought was of Abigail, of the photographs being developed in a darkroom, of evidence accumulating in Philadelphia, of truth slowly, painfully, impossibly breaking through layers of institutional concrete. Strike 149. The world reduced to a pinpoint of awareness. Strike 150. Darkness, complete and merciful. When Samantha regained consciousness, she was in her cell. No memory of being transported. Time had become meaningless. Minutes or hours or days could have passed. Her back felt like it had been flayed open and set on fire. She couldn't move without triggering waves of agony so intense they caused immediate nausea. The cell door opened. Abigail entered, medical kit in hand, face pale and set. She didn't speak immediately, just knelt beside the cot, lifted Samantha's shift with trembling hands, and stared at the devastation. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. Then again like a prayer. "Jesus Christ." She worked in silence, cleaning wounds that wept blood and clear fluid, applying bandages that immediately soaked through. Her hands shook throughout. Finally, "I need to photograph this." Samantha nodded weakly. The camera flash filled the cell like lightning. 3 exposures, different angles, clinical documentation of torture so extreme it transcended medical justification. "This is it," Abigail said, voice hollow. "This is the photograph that ends them." She showed Samantha the developed image from treatment 24. Samantha stared at her own back rendered in brutal black and white. The damage was architectural, layers of trauma creating a landscape of suffering that no viewer could interpret as anything but deliberate cruelty. "My brother delivered the complete file to the Senate Subcommittee on Constitutional Rights yesterday," Abigail continued. 24 photographs, 17 pages of written testimony, recovered documents about MKUltra, names, dates, everything. She paused. They're opening an investigation. Federal agents are coming. Samantha closed her eyes. When? Soon, days maybe, a week at most. Abigail gripped her hand. You just have to survive a little longer. Can you do that? Samantha thought about the question. Survival had become her entire existence. Not living, just the mechanical continuation of breath and heartbeat. But now, for the first time in 6 months, survival meant something beyond simple endurance. It meant witnessing. It meant justice. It meant that the 25 treatments, the 150 strikes, the months of systematic destruction, it all meant something. Yes, she whispered. Good. Abigail stood, gathered her supplies. Because when those federal agents arrive, you're going to tell them everything, and they're going to listen. The cell door closed. Samantha lay in darkness, back blazing with pain that would scar her forever. But somewhere in Philadelphia, in Washington, D.C., in newspaper offices and congressional chambers, machinery was turning. The machinery of exposure, of accountability, of truth finally, impossibly breaking through. Institute Hawthorne, January 7th, 1959. The federal agents arrived on a Tuesday morning, 14 months after Samantha's final treatment. Not investigators, not journalists. Federal marshals with arrest warrants and congressional subpoenas. They came in force. 12 vehicles, 47 personnel, legal authority that superseded state jurisdiction. Dr. Elias Thorne was arrested in his office at 9:17 a.m. The charges read like an indictment of institutional medicine itself. Torture, human experimentation without consent, fraud, conspiracy to violate civil rights, accessory to murder. 23 counts, each one carrying significant prison time. Harold Wickham was arrested at his home in Willow Creek 2 hours later. Additional charges: conspiracy, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation through unlawful detention. By noon, 17 arrest warrants had been executed. Hospital administrators, pharmaceutical executives, CIA operatives, military liaisons. The conspiracy stretched far beyond one institute, one doctor, one method. The photographs had done what testimony alone never could. 25 images, developed in a hospital darkroom by a nurse who understood that some truths required visual proof. Images so devastating that congressional aides reportedly vomited upon first viewing. Images that made denial impossible and justification obscene. The investigation that followed was classified for decades. Official records remained sealed until 1984, when the Freedom of Information Act forced partial disclosure. Even then, thousands of pages were redacted, names blacked out, methodologies obscured, institutional culpability softened through bureaucratic language. But the core truth emerged. The Institute Hawthorne for Mental Rehabilitation had operated as a front for CIA-funded mind control experiments under Project MKUltra. Between 1952 and 1959, an estimated 473 women were subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques, disguised as psychiatric treatment. Of those, 147 died during or shortly after experimentation. Their bodies were cremated without family notification. Their deaths were recorded as suicides, heart failures, or complications from pre-existing mental illness. Samantha Elizabeth Harrow was released from the Institute on January 15, 1959, 2 years and 10 months after her admission. She walked out carrying a single cardboard box containing the possessions she had arrived with: 3 dresses, a photograph of her father, and the notebook she had hidden in Willow Creek, returned to her by federal investigators who had recovered it during evidence collection. She testified before the Senate Subcommittee on Constitutional Rights on March 3, 1959. The hearing room was packed. Journalists, legal observers, family members of other victims. She sat at a wooden table, facing a panel of senators who regarded her with expressions ranging from sympathy to discomfort to outright skepticism. "Miss Harrow," the chairman began, Please state for the record your experience at the Institute Hawthorne. Samantha spoke for 47 minutes. She did not cry, did not raise her voice, simply recounted in clinical detail the procedural reality of institutional torture, the basement chamber, the lunar calendar, the 25 treatments, the observers behind glass, the progression from 20 strikes to 150. When she finished, the room sat in stunned silence. Then a senator, a man in his 60s with military decorations on his lapel, spoke. Miss Harrow, these are extraordinary allegations. Do you have any physical evidence to corroborate your testimony? Samantha stood, turned her back to the committee, lifted her blouse. The scars were visible even from the gallery, layered welts that had healed into raised tissue, creating patterns that resembled topographical maps of suffering. The damage was systematic, methodical, undeniable. Photographers captured the moment. The image appeared on the front page of the New York Times the next morning. A woman's scarred back, face turned away, body made testimony. The caption read, "These marks are not from a psychiatric patient. They are from a witness." The investigation expanded. Other survivors came forward. Women who had survived Pavilion C, who had undergone electroshock experiments, who had been sterilized without consent, who had watched roommates die from overdoses disguised as medication errors. Ruth Caldwell testified. So did 17 others. Abigail Morrison, the nurse who had photographed the evidence, testified about institutional complicity. She had been fired from Hawthorne in December 1957 after administrators discovered darkroom supplies missing. She had continued sending documentation to her brother regardless, working as a private nurse while building the case that would eventually expose the conspiracy. The trials lasted 3 years. Dr. Elias Thorne was convicted on 19 of 23 charges, sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. He served 11 before dying of a heart attack in 1970. Harold Wickham was convicted of conspiracy and witness intimidation, sentenced to 8 years, released after 5 for good behavior. The Institute Hawthorne was permanently closed in February 1960. The building stood empty for decades before being demolished in 1987. A small memorial plaque now marks the location. In memory of the women who suffered here, may their testimony ensure such atrocities never occur in silence again. But the memorial doesn't name them, doesn't list the 147 who died, doesn't specify what suffered actually meant in concrete physical terms. That work falls to survivors, to archivists, to those willing to read declassified documents and confront uncomfortable truths about institutional power and the bodies it destroys in pursuit of control. Samantha Elizabeth Harrow lived until 2003. She never married, never had children, worked as a legal secretary in Philadelphia, where her brother-in-law, Abigail's brother, had helped establish her new life. She rarely spoke about her experience publicly after the trials ended, but she kept meticulous records, journals, correspondence, copies of every document related to the case. When she died at age 74, she left her archive to the National Archives with specific instructions. Full public access after 20 years. Those documents were made available in 2023. They include the 17 pages she wrote in cell 47, smuggled out one sheet at a time, by a nurse who believed documentation mattered more than safety. They include 25 photographs, each one numbered and dated, showing the progressive destruction of human tissue under the guise of medical treatment. They include her testimony before Congress, transcribed in full, unredacted. And they include one final document, a letter written in 2002, 1 year before her death, addressed to whoever reads this. I do not write this for sympathy. I write it as evidence. The scars on my back are not metaphors. They are facts. They exist in 3 dimensions. They can be photographed, measured, documented. They prove that what happened to me was not treatment. It was torture. Systematic, bureaucratic, state-sanctioned torture of women whose only crime was speaking truth that powerful men found inconvenient. I survived to testify. 147 others did not. Their names deserve to be spoken, Their stories deserve to be known, not as tragedy, not as cautionary tale, but as historical fact that must never be minimized, rationalized, or forgotten. The institutions that destroyed us operated with legal authority, medical justification, and social approval. They kept meticulous records, they published papers, they trained future doctors in their methodologies. This is what makes institutional violence so dangerous. It disguises itself as expertise, as care, as treatment for our own good. My back tells a different story, one that cannot be rewritten or explained away. These scars are not mine alone. They belong to every woman who was silenced, disappeared, erased from official records while still breathing. Let them speak now. Let them be heard. Samantha Elizabeth Harrow, 1929-2003. The archive photograph referenced in this final chapter has been declassified. It shows a woman's back, photographed in harsh institutional light. The damage is catastrophic, layers of scar tissue creating patterns that medical examiners described as consistent with sustained, methodical physical trauma over an extended period. The image is difficult to view. That's intentional. Some truths cannot be softened. They must be witnessed in their full, brutal reality. The caption beneath the photograph reads, Subject 4489, Final Documentation, December 16, 1957. These marks are not from illness. They are from authority. In a world that tried to erase them, the women who never returned are finally remembered, not as victims to be pitied, but as witnesses whose testimony, written in scars and documented in photographs, brought down an empire built on silence. In a world that tried to erase them, women who never returned remembers.